Hey folks, Tim Miller here, and I am thrilled and excited to team again with my friend Dennis Watkins. For those of you who don't know Dennis, Dennis is an amazing man. He actually has been involved in church related law longer than I've been born, I think. Is that? No, that's not true, folks.
It probably
I
almost is.
Dennis is a young buck, but when it comes to churches and you think about all that's going on across our land, I always default to Dennis. And I'm going to let Dennis tell you a little bit about himself, but let me preface this conversation. If you are serving actually anywhere in a church, but especially in any kind of frontline ministry, ushers, greeters, security, it is really important, folks, that you consider as part of your service some important things. And we're going to talk about some of those things today because let me just be clear for believers, we believe that God's word is true. And we know the end of the story. And between now and the end of the story, I think we all would agree, according to scripture, there are going to be some rough times. So, Dennis, tell everybody about yourself, maybe those who don't know you.
Well, thank you, Tim. It's great to be with you. I work for the Church of God. I'm the legal counsel. Been here since 1994. And since 1994, as you know, the world has changed in terms of the legal climate and the security, safety landscape. Such a change. I had the privilege of meeting you some years ago through your work with one of our churches. And from that time on, it's just been wonderful to see what you're doing, what Secure Church is doing, and how important this aspect of church operations is, and what an incredible and incredibly important ministry this is that you guys are working in. So I count it a great privilege to know you. I've been to your seminars. I've heard your speeches, your presentations, and I think they're the best, Tim. I'm not saying that because we are friends, but
Right.
I believe your material, your presentations are the best, and I would do anything I could to promulgate that everywhere.
Well, brother, thank you. You've been a constant encouragement, to our team. And I think when we first met, it was kind of a God thing that, we, as you know, Mark and many of our team, we were retired from federal law enforcement. Many of us had local law enforcement experience. And I never, as a Secret Service agent, thought, man, one day I want to work church security. But God had a different perspective. And I think what we try to do is present things to teams, both in terms of the heart and the skills of David, so that we can be all that God's called us to be in this time. Because what we know is we don't want it to be a lockdown. We don't want it to look like a prison. We want it to have an open environment where hurting people can feel welcome, while at the same time understanding that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And Dennis, you're the smartest guy I know. You're my go-to guy when it comes to anything.
You're making fun of me again.
No, I actually am giving you the credit due you. 6,500 churches, I think, or more.
Ballpark, right
Yeah,
around that.
yeah, that's a lot of responsibility. To kind of wade through a lot of the issues that you're dealing with. And I can't imagine, I know every time I talk to you and you start talking about the dynamics of specific, in generality, of course, but specific issues that are arising in the church. I just think it's so important that folks really consider that aspect, because you can go and not think about those things. And then poof, something happens. And I'm not going to pin you down on any cases because I know you can't talk about, the specifics. But how would you encourage, especially, we'll get into some of the armed issues just in generalities, but what would you say to every person serving in a church ministry in terms of understanding how important it is to know the law, and to really think through in advance maybe some legal issues that they may face?
Well, you hit the nail on the head when you said ministry.
Hmm.
because that's the focus and approach that you guys take in looking at this, so much more than people walking around with guns trying to imagine a shooter situation. So everything I know about this subject is something that I gleaned from you.
Hmm.
And that is that, it's such a holistic view. It requires so many more people than just people carrying guns. It requires ushers, greeters, starting at the parking lot, and most of all, a heart for ministry by people who are trained and who are skilled and experienced in this. We have a lot of well-meaning people, Tim, that want to do the right thing and help their church out. But if they could just get your training and understand your ministry and your heart and put all that to use for the best result in making sure that the kingdom is protected. That's what I would like.
Yeah, and I think, Dennis, that's clearly our heart. We don't want worship interrupted, and but at the same time, bad things can happen, and you realize that in today's world, as mental health issues rise, domestic issues rise, custody issues are on the rise, active violence, street crime is on the rise. That we have to kind of look at things differently, in terms of how do we protect with skill the congregations. And the thing I love about Church of God, Dennis, is you guys are very focused on saying, hey, there are 6,500 churches, but we want you all to be safe. We're here to support you. And yet it really does come down to that individual pastor at the church saying, hey, here's the kinds of things that I'm going to get behind, because if the pastor doesn't get behind any ministry, it's probably not going to go well, is it?
Correct.
Yeah.
That is very correct. And you're right. There's such a variation. I can't dictate to every local church, you've got to do this, you've got to do that.
Hmm.
I'm a resource. I try to get the best information I can out there to them. But in the end, it is what the local church and its operation assumes to be necessary for them, and it does vary. But I agree with everything you're saying.
So let me ask you specifically, Dennis, if there's a pastor listening to this and he says, oh, Dennis, I only have 50 or 60 people. Um, Talk to me about the kinds, and I'm not talking specifics of security, but talk to me about kind of what, first off, things he should think about and actually be doing. And I'm not, again, not specifics, but as a pastor, what are his responsibilities to provide a safe and secure environment?
That's a great point, because uh, the history of church shootings better than anybody,
Hmm.
and I'm sure I'm thinking of one already where there were fewer than 60 people in that church when there was a shooting. So this illustrates your point: is the things that you guys are teaching and the principles that need to be followed apply to a small church just as much as to a large church, and to a small crowd just as much as to a large crowd, maybe even more so. So
Yeah.
no, you're right on it. It goes all the way across the board. And also the the necessity of training and how to train for a smaller crowd might be different from, a mega church. And I know you've been in all sizes, trained in all sizes, but you're saying exactly what I think is the reality.
Yeah. So, Dennis, let me ask you this, because you handle the backside of an event. One of the things we try to encourage every church, regardless of size, to do is to have a clear emergency plan, not just for active violence. You're more likely to get hit by lightning than to have an active violence event there. But you will have likely some kind of domestic issue, some kind of mental health issue. Last time I checked, every place we have churches, they are affected by weather or fire. And so I know you don't prescribe to every church, how to do that. But, for you, especially as a representative of Church of God, how important is it that they have a very clear emergency plan regardless of size?
Well, it is so vital, and every time I've heard you guys' presentations, had that privilege, it something else jumps out at me. Oh man, that is so appropriate to every church, but big, small, medium, everywhere it's needed.
Dennis, what do you think are the greatest areas of potential civil exposure for churches these days? Is it policy? Is it clearly, defined bylaws? What are the things that, as a general rule, churches should pay attention to these days?
Well, that's a very broad,
Right,
open-ended question, but in terms of your field
right.
and what you do, I learned from you just some basic things, some basic principles that it might not take, a sophisticated team or, months and months of training, but just some basic things that I learned from you. If we could impart that to all churches, once again, I don't want to tread over in your water because this is your field, but, you taught me so many of these incidents that we've seen could have been stopped in the parking lot.
That's
How
right.
did they get past that point to inside the building of the church? So it's just some basic things. If we could get that out to our people, I'm sure it would go a long way in some very important situations.
And Dennis, I think, you and I are really in sync in terms of the importance of churches planning ahead. What you just talked about, the idea of having, as part of your team, even for the smallest church, having observation in the parking lot, whether it be cameras and or people, it really needs to be both. But having the training to understand what we're looking for and then what to do if you see it, because most churches don't have 10 police officers off duty in their congregations. They have faithful people who come. And so I think that would, and you and I've talked about this, you have to start where you are. And, the most important thing in my mind is planning, but planning through the lens of, anticipating kind of a bunch of different potential dangers. And then coordinating with the local fire department, reaching out to the local sheriff's department, having a conversation with them about, hey, what do we do? And then realizing that at the end of the day, if you have information that is concerning you, it likely would be of concern to law enforcement because pastors know when people are crossing the line. They're usually very, very good at identifying that. And so, on the one hand, we want to protect that pastor relationship. But on the other hand, when it starts to go down a direction that's potentially dangerous, we'd want to have those connections just to say, hey, Sheriff Bill, we're dealing with a situation. You don't even have to use names, but here's where we are right now. Um, and like you said, with the mindset in the Secret Service, it was all about being proactive in security, not reactive, because if you're reactive, you're waiting until it happens. And so, from my perspective, it's so important in these days, which is why I appreciate. I've actually had the pleasure of presenting to your elders there and love the spirit of wisdom, not fear. Nobody's afraid, but everybody recognizes for these times, we have to be prepared. We have to be wise. And that goes back to, I know you can't go into a lot of the details of the issues that you're running or that you're facing, but as a general rule, I think you would agree with me. And if you could just, talk about, hey, pastors need to do the following things, whether it's have a basic plan, connect with law enforcement and fire, identify some folks in your congregation that could be alert and aware. Um, and I know we've kind of gone back and forth, but how important is it if it goes into any kind of litigation down the road that they demonstrated reasonable care in terms of planning and training?
Well, that's exactly right. And you'll have people dissecting what you did and how you responded or whatever, who don't care about the church or the work of the Lord, and will be looking at things with a critical eye, won't give you any benefit of the doubt. And they'll, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that?
Mm.
And that's why training becomes so important.
And
It's
Dennis,
vital.
what would you say, to that pastor who goes, well, we don't really have the resources? Would you say to him, at least make a phone call to the sheriff's department? At least invite them over, sit down, the fire department, and even things like medical response. Some of the folks in our churches are older. The demographics, the church is getting older. And so the ability to care for them in a responsive way is becoming more important. And I think though that kind of preventative thing is kind of what's been on my heart. If we do the work up front, then it does it not make it easier for you on the back end if we're wise and prepared at every church.
Yeah, Tim, that made me think about some of the classes that I sat through that you guys uh, provide, and it was just like, oh wow, that's not my field of endeavor, but then it was such basic, fundamental action that you could take, that it made so much sense. Of wow, why didn't I think about that? Why didn't I know about that? And that's not dependent on the size of a church.
Mm-hmm.
It would be the same principle for a small church as well as for any other size church. And these principles, there are basic fundamental principles that you guys teach, that if we could get out there to all of our congregations, it would just be such a help. I know you can't pinpoint every potential situation. You can't be perfect in every situation, every fact pattern. But boy, every time I've heard you guys talk, I go, wow, that's fundamental. And I'm so glad. You made me a better usher. I'm an usher in my church, and they put me in the office. They don't even let me mix with people too much. And I sit there with an open window and watch the parking lot.
That's so
And
wise.
nobody knows I'm watching. I know we have
So
cameras, we
wise.
have other things. And one
Yeah,
day somebody came through there that I went, whoa, I'm not a law enforcement, but this doesn't look right. And I
that's
made
right.
a call. I mean, it's just such basic principles, Tim. You guys, every time I listen to you guys, I go, that is so basic. How can we get that out?
Well, brother, that warms my heart because we can present all day long, but until people, put it into practice, exactly what you're talking about. And by the way, you're as observant and aware as any law enforcement officer because you're paying attention and you're watching what's happening. And, if everybody, we're big on training all of the welcome teams, the parking lot folks for the bigger churches, the ushers, greeters, especially sanctuary inside the safety and security team, which I have to touch on. And I know you have to be general. I get it. But I hear a lot of folks from a lot of churches. I watch the Facebook church security conversations, and more often than not, I choose not to engage. But I do watch a lot of rhetoric about, oh, well, our church has insurance that covers me on the security team when I'm armed. And I'm going to preface it and make it easy for you. But after having watched, actually been engaged in the follow on lawsuits and the depositions and all that stuff, and then watching, you can virtually watch it all day long now. Every internal affairs investigation, every civil, the depositions are right out there in front. You realize very quickly that insurance does not give you authority to do things that the law says you can't do. And in certain states, people have the impression that because they have a weapon on and they're serving on behalf of the church as a volunteer, that they can take actions to include intermediate weapons, restraints, and all the things, quite frankly, that nowadays law enforcement officers are hesitant, to step into. And so in terms of, can you just give us some insight into church security insurance? And I know there are big ones out there, big companies that advertise a rider and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting to me as I even look at some of the concealed carry insurance out there, and you realize quickly that for some of the largest, I won't name them, but for some of the largest carriers, they retain the right to either accept the claim or deny the claim. And if you've done anything outside of the scope, they'll tell you right up front, we're not going to represent you. So long question, probably you have a short answer. When you think about church security teams being covered, can you give us some general ideas as to if that's in fact true? What kinds of things would result in a church security insurance saying, no, we're not covering them there?
Well, you make great sense. I mean, my experience has been if an insurance company thinks there's been excessive force or improper use of force in a situation, there's an exception for that in the policy on page 903, and you know it's going to be there.
What's
So
your quote
you've got
on
to
policies? What?
insurance is the bold print giveth and the fine print taketh away.
I
And
love
in
that.
page 1, we cover everything. Page 2 through 945, except
Wow.
this. So you've
Wow.
got to be careful. You got to be careful that all the things you talk about, training, use of proper training, and everything that you're emphasizing is adhered to, or it's going to be like what we see in the law enforcement police type litigation. It's just automatic.
Dennis, that's so wise too, because as I learned personally in my journey, we train firearms. I'm an instructor, and I place a high value. But it's the how to shoot is one thing. The when to shoot is the difference between you spending the rest of your life in jail, no matter how good you look or how well you learn the how to shoot. It's the when to shoot. And so I think, piggybacking on what you just said, you need to read the fine print and find out if, in fact, while you're doing what you're doing, when I was running our teams, I every single time we got together, we started where we should at the foot of the cross, we in the word and then in prayer, but then we would remind every week, you're not the police and you don't play one on TV. So before you take proactive action, even grabbing somebody, you better know the law, and you better understand that the police are going to be the ones, if at all possible. Now sometimes it's exigent, sometimes there's violence happening and you have to step in, and quite frankly, that's why a lot of folks are there, to step in and be that buffer. Praise God for them. But the wisdom of knowing when you can do anything per the law and per your insurance, I just can't overstate. And I think that's where, why am I saying this? Well, brother, I'm preaching to the choir. You deal with these issues, but we're seeing activists protesting in sanctuaries. We're seeing folks that are just plain angry, protesting outside, spitting and doing things. We're seeing, even in some cases, takeover of sanctuaries, people standing up with bullhorns, and all of that is stressful. And I learned in the military and in law enforcement, your training prepares you for stress. If you are able to have good training, then you're going to go into your training when stress occurs. So I just really appreciate your wisdom on that, because I think, the bold print giveth and fine print taketh away. If you get nothing else out of this conversation, look at and that applies to state law too, by the way, because, because we train use of force, like the state I'm in now, Maryland, you have a duty to retreat. The state I live in, Florida, you have stand your ground. And everybody goes, oh, well, stand your ground. You can do anything. No, you can't. No, you can't. You got to know the law. You got to know the facts of how and when to use force. And then you have to understand what reasonable force is. So I realized, I went on a little long, but I really appreciate your faithfulness to support church security training within Church of God churches. And quite frankly, you've been an advisor to me and for other churches. And Dennis, is there anything else you would say to either team members or leaders in the church that you would say, hey, whatever you do, think about this or that? And anything come to mind?
Well, we have a lot of well-meaning people, Tim, and I know the laws, like you said, vary around the country. We have a lot of well-meaning people that bring guns to church,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't take issue with them. That's certainly very important to them and part of their rights. And I've seen this, how it works in churches, but they need to make sure that they are actively getting training and part of the team and understand coordination of that with everybody else in the church that might be carrying a gun. And once again, I'm not casting aspersions on anybody that brings a gun to church. I think most of those people, Tim, really are thinking about their own personal safety and the
Right.
safety of their family. I've got
Right.
no problem with that. But I wish that they would be mindful that in a serious situation, they need to be coordinated with everybody else that's got guns or on the safety team or anything else, and that everybody needs to know that, and everybody needs to be working together. You'll see people that say, well, I don't want anybody to know. I don't care for anybody to know. Well, that's great, but they need to know. The team needs to
Amen.
know. The team leader needs to know. And the person carrying a gun needs training. They may not have the extensive training that you guys do. And so I would just ask everyone that believes that they should bring a gun to church, fine with me. That's their business. Just be a part of the team and get
Yes.
that training that everybody else has, and then coordinate with everyone so that everybody's on the same page.
Dennis, that's so wise. I mean, from a number of standpoints, it's wise. Legally, it's wise, but also tactically. I often remind folks that carry weapons, remember that when law enforcement comes screaming in, having heard that shots have been fired, they don't necessarily know who has been firing the shots. And they're coming in these days wanting to go home to their family at the end of the day. And that goes towards, and you've been there, what we train, if you're armed and armed police officers are showing up, you better show them your palms. That's it. If you have a weapon, you better put it away and you better identify when you can. I'm armed. I'm not. I'm just armed with a concealed carry. And then the police officers will tell you what to do from that standpoint. But a lot of folks have never thought through, what would I do if it happened? And now we've got a white settlement church shooting type thing where you've got a guy actually trying to hurt people in the sanctuary. And that's where it goes back to training and preparation. And that's what I love about you. You really do encourage everybody. Hey, look, don't wait until gunshots are going off. It doesn't tend to go well in those circumstances. So, Dennis, I am grateful for you. Thank you for your time. As always, you're always a voice of wisdom, and I'm very appreciative. I can't tell you how appreciative I am of just your wise counsel. And if folks, if you're out here and you say, man, that guy knows what he's talking about, and you need to reach out to him, Dennis, how would somebody get in contact with you?
Just contact me at legal@churchofgod.org.
Legal?
Or call Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. They'll get you to me. I get calls like
Great.
that. And
Okay.
Tim, I know you guys are doing a presentation and a conference on April the 19th up
Yes.
in Hartford, Connecticut. I cannot be there, or else I would be there if I had any way I could. But I exalt family above a lot of things, and that's a day of a certain thing for my family I must do. But I hope everybody, if they hear this, could try to make a way to get up there and hear you guys in Hartford, Connecticut. And if I could be there, I would be there.
I know you've always been there, brother, and but I think this is kind of important. I think you're choosing between honoring your wife and not, and I think you went for the higher calling, pretty sure. But but let me encourage you. That's Rehoboth Church of God in Hartford, Connecticut. If you go to their website, Rehoboth Church of God in Hartford, Connecticut, there's a sign up there. And folks, we're bringing our whole team. We're bringing Mark Lundgren, retired FBI agent. We're bringing Angelia Hobson from Willow Creek, who's going to be talking about how to train volunteer teams and things you really need to think about in terms of having a practical plan. We'll have Milo Range there. We've got my friend Matt Piscolini, who is he's a bad man. He's a martial arts guy, but he's going to talk to everybody about having a personal plan if somebody's aggressive and if they actually begin to become aggressive. And folks, why are we talking about that? Because it says in the last days, people are going to become more violent. We're seeing it. And so Matt, through the lens of ministry, will talk about just some basic things that you can think about. We'll have Dave Adler. You know, Dave is one of the lead emergency management officials in the state of Illinois. He's going to talk to you about planning. Here's the point. We're going to give you the best experts in the country with the best information, all of them involved in church ministry, and they have a passion for church security ministry. So we hope you'll join us. You can actually check our webpage out as well, lionheartsecurityteam.com. Go to the events page and you'll see the conference there. You can get to it that way. Dennis, thank you, my brother. It is always amazing to spend time with you. I'm truly grateful, and we'll be praying for you. And obviously, I'm a phone call away if you need me.
And same to you, my dear friend. I hope everybody can come hear you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. God bless.
God bless.